Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital, and typically joining me, Mr. Michael Becker. Unfortunately, Michael is on another due diligence assignment. And in the podcast today, Ricardo Hinojosa. Ricardo, how are you?
Doing fantastic, Paul. Glad to be here.
And as you know, Ricardo is also a loan officer with Old Capital. He's been with us a number of years. He is the best of the best. If you have a financial question concerning apartment financing, if you want to learn more about what we do at Old Capital, again, remember Old Capital did $1 billion in apartment financing last year. A lot of it was done by Ricardo Hinojosa. You want to meet Ricardo, spend some time with him, go to the oldcapitallending.com website, and you'll get his email address and the ability to give him a call. So, Ricardo, thanks for being on the team. We appreciate that. And don't forget, the Old Capital Multifamily Conference 2019 is going to be October 24th, 25th down here in Dallas. Any way you can get here. This is a national conference. It's not a regional conference. We'll have 600 or 700 investors come to network in Texas. So if there's a way that you can get on a Southwest jet, American Airlines, Delta jet, come down to Texas and see us. Our keynote speaker this year will be Coach Lou Holtz. We have two Michigan people in front of me. Unfortunately, it will be Coach Lou Holtz talking about doing the right thing for not only for your property, but your limited partners, your lender, and just doing the right thing when it comes to managing and owning multifamily properties. Just a great speaker, University of Notre Dame, or Notre Dame University, however you want to say it. Winner of the national championship, just a great speaker. Looking forward to having him talk a little bit about doing the right thing in multifamily. So doing the right thing in multifamily, we have two of our friends right now that we've known for a long period of time, and they've done the right thing for their investors. They've done the right thing for the property. And, we've had them on before. They had purchased the property up in Detroit. They live up in Detroit, and, they've bought another property, and we wanted to kind of focus on that property because they did it when they were W-2 employees. And one of them has now just recently left her W-2 employment job and now is kind of doing real estate on a full-time basis. So in the podcast today, we have Greg and Nicole Scott. Thanks, guys, for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us back. It's great seeing you guys again.
Thanks, Paul.
So I want to kind of talk a little bit about your history first. I mean, how did you get into multifamily, and why did you get into multifamily?
It's all Greg's fault.
Okay,
Depending on the day, he gets all the credit or all the blame.
Yeah, So I think everybody remembers the recession of 2008 very well. We both worked for Ford Motor Company. I still work. Nicole now worked for Ford Motor Company. And during the 2008 recession, there was about a 2-month period where the company went and laid off about 25% of the people. And we realized that the plan that we had was not very good. So that actually pushed us into single family investing. We started buying some single families around the country. And then we discovered Lifestyles down here in Texas, became a member, did a lot of single family here. But as we were doing that, learned multifamily from them and started investing passively. And as we're investing passively, people started asking us, well, how come you're not doing that up in Detroit? And that really transitioned us to being syndicators and owners.
And how did you find Lifestyles, which is, kind of a regional group, at least at the time was out of Texas, an educational mentoring program? You guys live up in Detroit. How did you find them of all places?
Yeah, I discovered their podcast, which apparently is a really great way to reach people.
So you listen to their podcast. You got the passion from listening to Del Wamsley and his group at Lifestyles Unlimited, which they're an educational mentoring group based out of Texas, but now they're all over the United States, and so they have operations in different areas of the country. So if you do have a chance, go listen to Lifestyles Unlimited podcast, and then maybe think about becoming a member of their group. Okay, another good plug for them. non-solicited, and we have no ownership in them and they have no ownership in us, but we think that they do a pretty good job. So you got the passion to get into the multifamily business by listening to the podcast. You saw what was happening with your jobs at Ford at that period of time, and you're looking maybe for a better way to get additional income, find a way to get prepared for retirement. And you said that multifamily probably was it down the road. And so the first thing you did once you got your education and training from Lifestyles is, what did you guys do?
Well, we first invested passively.
Okay.
So our first deal that we got into was in December 2014, and the second one in January of 2015, and then several other ones beyond that. But by the time we had done 3 or 4 deals passively, that's when we really started thinking, hey, this is something we could probably do as well.
What was the benefits for investing in passive transactions? Again, you weren't the managing member. You were just like limited partner. You were one of the passengers in the back of the airplane, and the people that were putting the transaction together was the captain and the first officer. But you guys were just eating your peanuts and drinking your Coke and waiting for them to get you the rates of return. So what was that all about? Well,
I think more than just eating peanuts and drinking Coke, we were observing the captain and what they were doing and trying to pay attention to what they were doing. And at the same time, we were taking advantage of all the great education that Lifestyles offers to really learn it and then compare to what was going on in the properties we were investing with. And that gave us a comfort level that we could do it ourselves.
That's great. And so what was your first transaction that you guys became the captains of the airplane?
So we decided to start looking, and we found a small property up actually right by Detroit Metro Airport, and 24 unit. And we purchased that back August 31st of 2016. So it's just shy of 3 years that we've owned that property, and been running that. It was a cash flowing property. It was stable, needed a little love, had been kind of mom and popped. So it needed some rehab, and we're redoing the units as they turn. And we've done quite a few of them now. I can't remember exactly how many. Probably
a little over half, probably 60% of them.
So give me a kind of a visual on the property. What does it look like? What year was it built?
It's a 1970 brick construction, pitched roof, garden style. Of course, in Detroit, because of the winters, most of our garden styles have indoor hallways and stairwells. But it's a pretty simple box that.
And when you guys bought it, what was the occupancy at that period of time, and what is it today?
Well, physical occupancy was 100% when we bought it, but it was probably more like 90% economic occupancy.
Okay, and where is it today?
We just had some units turnover, so I think we have 2 vacant units right now, and we're starting to get a better level of tenant in there.
And what was the rent per unit on like a 1 or 2 bedroom versus what it is today?
That property is all 2 bedrooms, and our average rent was $643 at the time we bought it. We are regularly getting $800 on a new lease up.
No kidding. And how much work did you have to put into it on a per unit basis of cost, and where did that money go into?
We addressed a lot of deferred maintenance on the property itself, such as parking lots and roofs and things like that. But when we're rehabbing a unit, it's about a $6,000 rehab.
Wow, $6,000?
Yeah, we go in and we put in new vinyl plank, cabinets, countertops should the unit need it. If it doesn't need it, then we don't, right? Carpeting, new fixtures, everything in that property was mom and popped. So if you had like an electrical out, you might have a black switch and an off-white cover plate, right? It just looked kind of sloppy. So clean all that up, make it look nice, white trim, 2-tone paint, right? And make it best product, best price.
And do you guys manage that property because you guys live in Detroit, or do you have a third-party management company, or how does that work for you guys and the size of that deal?
We were both working full-time, more than full-time, salary employees. So we did have a third-party management company. Now, with it being so small, you obviously cannot afford to have on-site management. So we were getting part of a part-time person when we would have a work order, or, a unit would need to be shown to be leased. So there were people there, but not all the time. So even today, we spend, a fair amount of time at the property, checking things out, making sure things are getting done, and making sure things are running properly.
And we have always acted as the asset manager, so taking care of, contracts and things like that. Unfortunately, our property management company is a little slower than we like on some of the unit turns, so we get involved and hire some of the contractors ourselves, and unfortunately sometimes go swing the hammer on things that we need to get taken care of very quickly.
And what's your 2 cents on how Detroit is doing these days? I mean, you guys live up there, you work up there, or Greg does up in that industry. How's the economy up there?
So it's interesting because I hear people from around the world being very interested in Detroit real estate these days. Metro Detroit as a whole has been fairly stable population for years. The city of Detroit, since 1950 till about 10 years ago, was in a steady decline. After the recession, there were a number of entrepreneurs that came in and started fixing up the downtown area, and the downtown area has been booming.
Yeah.
But you really got to be careful what neighborhood you're in. You got to pick your spots. You can be in a great neighborhood that's really robust, and you go 2 or 3 blocks the other direction, and you're in not such a great area. So there's huge opportunities there, but you just got to be careful.
Would you think about putting more money into the Detroit area if there was an opportunity that came around?
We are not terribly interested in the city itself. There's still quite a bit of corruption. The city services, the government there, they're a little bit on the more difficult side to work with. We've got some friends that we know that we're trying to open a restaurant and permits, and just it's difficult to work with the
It's
city.
challenging there,
Yes.
and you'd rather go to areas that are landlord friendly and
Correct.
business friendly and things like that.
When we were looking for our second property, we did look in Metro Detroit. There just wasn't as much deal flow. And so we'd wait around for 2 weeks and the deal would come up in 10 minutes. You go, yeah, that one doesn't work. And then you wait for 2 weeks, and that just got very frustrating. So we just started expanding the area we were looking at.
So the second part of the podcast we really want to focus in on is your new property that you guys just bought. And it wasn't in Detroit, and that's the reason why I asked that question. It was in another part of the country. And so I'm going to turn this over to Ricardo, and let's kind of talk a little bit about the second transaction. And how the hell did you find Indianapolis on the map?
Well, as I mentioned, we had been into single family before. Our very first rent property was in Indianapolis. And we bought in 6 other states across the country before we ended up finding lifestyles and joining the group there and then getting into multifamily. And as I mentioned, we were having trouble finding things in Detroit. So we just started slowly expanding our search geography. And at one point, we were considering anything in Ohio, anything in Indiana, and anything in southern Michigan. And what we noticed was that as we're underwriting all these deals, the properties that were in cities that had some strong growth factors underwrote just so much better than the ones that were shrinking. And so we narrowed down our list to maybe 6 cities that we were interested in, and Indianapolis is one of them.
And again, how far of a drive or a flight is it from Detroit to Indianapolis?
It probably takes longer to fly. It's 4.5 hours from our door to our door of our property.
Oh, wow. It's a distance.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about going to a different state like that and being 4 hours away. And it's in a market where you had purchased some single-family homes, but you probably didn't have a whole lot of multifamily resources there in the city. How did you start building that up, building relationships, and taking the first step?
Well, actually, before we even started looking for properties, because of the challenges we had on our small property with multifamily management, Nicole said to me, we're not going to go look for another property until we have a good manager in place. And so I had gotten plugged in with the Detroit Metro Apartment Association, got some recommendations from them. I did a search of all of the large property management companies in the area that had any kind of units under management. Mm-hmm. We narrowed it down to about 10 property management companies, and then we mystery shopped their properties. We went and we met with their management, and we finally narrowed it down to 2. And the one that we chose is a company called Beztac. It just so happens their headquarters is 10 miles from our house, which is great. We developed a really good relationship with them. They were exceptionally helpful during the acquisition process because they would help us with some CoStar information, and they'd give us feedback on what they saw in the underwriting on the properties we became serious with. So we found them first.
Fantastic.
And they have 20,000 units under management centered mostly in the Great Lakes area.
Yeah. And you looked at how many deals leading up to that?
Wow.
Within Indy, because I remember, it was quite a bit of time. And you guys looked
Yeah.
at a number of deals. I mean, I think the key thing is you had them up front.
Yeah.
So their resources, you said, CoStar, being able to shop properties, knowing the market. How many deals did you look at in Indy with them? And how long did it take you, before you were able to land that first deal?
Because we were at the time, we hadn't settled on Indy, so we were looking at a lot of different places. But in Indianapolis just itself, we probably looked at 20 deals with a cursory look. and then maybe 10 of them with a little bit deeper. I think there were 5 or 6 that we submitted LOIs on, and we got the best and final on 4 of those.
Yeah. And in the meantime, you developed some key relationships, I think, with brokers, right?
Yep. Which
we all know that's a big piece of this business. Talk a little bit about that, how were you able to foster those relationships and eventually land that deal?
Yeah, I do think one of our strengths has been to develop relationships, and I can't say that we just do it purposely. We just like meeting people and talking to them and getting to know them. In Indianapolis, the top selling broker at the time, I think still was Ticketjon, which has since been purchased by Cushman and Wakefield. Mm-hmm. And so they were coming out with all the deals. So I just happened to be regularly talking to them and got to know one of the brokers. His name is Duke. He's a great guy. He's now retired, but just would enjoy coming down with him, talking, seeing the properties, and just chatting with him in between looking at properties. And we just developed a really good relationship with them. And they were the ones that suggested that we look at the property we ultimately bought. It was on the market, so everybody saw it, but they were the ones that said, we think this one might fit what you're looking for.
So let's talk a little bit about that property. What'd you like about it?
Well, we liked a lot of things about it. So the property itself, its location is in a city by the name of Beech Grove. It's surrounded by Indianapolis. And we like that because Beech Grove has its own city services. So it's got its own school system, its own police, fire, city services, and the community is very tight. In fact, Greg and I call it Mayberry because everybody knows everybody, and that can work for you or against you, right, depending on what kind of a person you are and how you run your business. But we really liked that feel about it. When we started talking with people in the area and reaching out to vendors, during the due diligence time frame and everything, it was, we couldn't believe it. It was amazing. We would reach out to a vendor and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I've done windows on that property before. I have all the counts. Would you like me to give them to you?" Yes, please. Right. The folks that we came across, the level of integrity that they seemed to have was very, very high. They went out of their way to be helpful. And they were also very happy that someone else was coming in and purchasing this property.
Well, you met the mayor, right?
We did. Yeah, it was kind of funny. Like Mayberry, the mayor had heard that the property was, for sale and was being purchased, and that the new owners were in town doing due diligence. And he decided to come by and say hi. So we were there with our team doing due diligence, and he popped in and spoke to the group for a bit. And he'd actually lived on the property back in the early 70s when he and his wife had first gotten married. He knew his unit number. He also remembered his rent, which he said was too much.
It was $150 a month.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Which was pretty funny. Yeah, so it was great. We took a picture with him, and yeah, it was kind of like Mayberry.
So you guys really scaled up on this deal. I don't think we talked about the size of the deal. Your first deal was 24 units.
24, yeah.
But this one...
Yeah, it's 272.
So big jump up.
Big. Go big or go home, right?
That's it. Scale is everything in this business, and you guys really went at it. 1970s property?
Yes, yeah, okay. Very early, yeah. So I think part of it was built in 69, 70, yeah.
Excellent. So you find the deal. Let's talk about some of the nuances of due diligence. What'd you find? You guys had a pretty sizable rehab budget. Let's talk a little bit about what you saw on the property and what you did kind of up front to make sure that you had resources in place to mitigate a lot of what you found.
Yeah, so due diligence was interesting. When we got under contract and we knew when our due diligence period was going to be, our property management company was going to come and do due diligence with us, and they were going to send some folks. However, they were also taking over several other properties at that same time, and they didn't have enough arms and legs to spare. So they could only send a few, and they said, okay, well, we'll do X percent lease file audit and a Y percent unit walk. And we said, nope, that does not work for us. We need 100% of everything. And we said, we have people. So we reached out to our friends in Lifestyles and had an opportunity for learning how to do due diligence. And we were very happy and impressed and just humbled by the response. We had 10 people come and do due diligence with due diligence. It's hard to say
Yeah.
with us for a few days, and some of them stayed just for a couple days. Some of them stayed with us the whole time. And when we all got on site, the management company said, formed the teams, trained everybody on exactly what they needed to do. Some had cameras, some had clipboards, some had, basically took them through the process, and then off we went. We did 100% lease file audit and 100% unit walk. I think there were only 5 units we couldn't get into because the residents had changed the locks, but all of the data matched up with the rent roll and everything. So
let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that is interesting, is that you had 10 people at their own dollar cost, because you guys didn't pay them to fly up from wherever they came from.
We didn't. Most everyone drove. We did cover their hotel and their food. Like, we would all go out to dinner after, but they didn't know we were going to do that before they agreed to come.
Yeah.
Right. But that to us was
and their purpose of why they wanted to do that was for what reason? Why would they drive for hours to be part of your team?
I think they were learning, right? Plus, it's fun in a strange sort of way.
And all but one invested in the property.
Yeah, they got to see it. But I think the average person drove 4 or 5 hours to be there, because we had people from Michigan, we had people from Wisconsin,
we had
Ohio.
a couple people from Indiana.
There's only one that actually lived in the city.
So we talked about due diligence and some of the things that go on with due diligence, but before that, you have to win the deal.
Right.
So let's talk about how you guys won the deal. Why do you think the seller was acceptable to your offer? Was it the price? Was it the flexibility? Was it that you guys didn't have experience in Indianapolis? So what do you think it was that the sellers felt that you were the right group to go with?
Well, on this particular deal, the original asking price or whispered numbers were $16 million. After a couple rounds of offers and best and final, and then a best and final, the price got up to $16.3.
And that happens, doesn't it? Because everyone thinks it's just a one round of best and final, and then it becomes a best and best final, and then sometimes it is a best and best final type of a deal.
So we felt we were getting stretched, but we just said, hey, we can't go higher than 16.3. That above that number, it didn't make sense to us. And we actually were not the highest price. It was all the work. I call it work, but it was really just getting to know the people. All the time we had spent with the broker, all the time we had spent trying to educate them on our background and the benefits that the network that Lifestyles had to support us. And we showed them details from our KPs, and that was our team, that we had a strong team. And they actually went to the seller and said, hey, these guys are not the highest offer, but we think they're the most likely to close. And that's how we ended up landing the deal.
So it was certainty of close. They felt that you guys were going to get the deal done. And that meant more to them than maybe a little more in dollars with higher risk.
The other thing that they said that they liked was, again, building your team. We had decided to go with a local real estate attorney for our contracts attorney in Indianapolis, and they had worked with that firm before, and they thought highly of that firm. And so that made them feel more comfortable also, that they knew someone that was on our team.
Did you go hard with earnest money at the beginning?
We did.
And how much was that?
$100.
So that wasn't that large.
Put 1,000 on the end of that, though. It wasn't just 100. Yeah, it was $100,000.
Yeah, $100,000.
Yeah.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah, $100.
$100 sounded a little shy.
$100,000 was hard day one just to get the copy of the contract signed and fully executed. So you guys were able to take the deal down. And so you're telling me that they kind of liked you guys. They liked that you went with a local law firm that they had used in the past, and they kind of saw the broker that represented them was saying good things about you, which is always very positive because that's their direct line of communication of how you are doing too. Did you guys do a phone call with the seller? And then, Ricardo, were you on that call, and how did that play out?
Yeah, so I think I had a number of conversations with the broker, starting with some previous deals. I think that the first couple of deals you guys were going after with that specific broker, I think we had a long discussion around you guys, the business we've done with you guys, around lifestyles, because he wasn't familiar with lifestyles. So having all those discussions on a previous deal, I think it was clear in their mind that you guys could close. So yeah, there was at least one call where we were all on, went through the whole checklist of What's the loan going to look like? Where's your equity coming from? Have you, done business with these guys before? Are you newbies, or can you really get this closed? Is kind of what they want to hear.
How did you feel Ricardo did on that call with the seller?
Ricardo's always been amazing. He's wonderful to work with. We wouldn't use anybody else.
Well, I think the results speak for themselves, though, don't they? We closed.
That's right. Absolutely. So you made a seller very happy on doing that. So let's keep on going through. So you had the due diligence piece. You brought these 10 folks up. They saw the property. And was there anything that they uncovered that you did not know?
A few things, right?
Yeah.
Quite honestly, after the first day of due diligence, we thought the deal was dead. The biggest factor was probably the HVAC systems. It seemed like every closet we opened up had these ancient hulking furnaces in them. We found out towards the end of the day that they were original. So remember, this place was built in 1970.
Wow.
So doing the math, 39 years old, 50 or 49-year-old units that they had just been limping along. And just so happened we ran into an HVAC contractor who was working on the property and said, oh, yeah, they stopped making replacement parts for those old ones last year.
Oh, boy.
So light bulb goes off. That's probably why the seller was selling, because he knew he had a big, big bill coming up. So at that moment, we thought the deal was dead, but we'd finished the due diligence and we collected all of our quotes and estimates for getting the rehabs done, plus now all of the new stuff that we found. We also found half of the hot water tanks were over 25 years old. So there was a lot of deferred maintenance there, and we started adding it all up. And I think it was about Christmas time. The other thing that had happened, though, is interest rates came down quite a bit last year. So we thought the deal was dead, but we still had a few weeks left of due diligence, so we were waiting. But we were talking to Ricardo, I think, every other day. Well, where are we now? What are interest rates at? And that's the interest rates coming down really saved the deal. But even then, I think by Christmas we said, hey, the numbers are decent enough now. It's really worth reconsidering. But we had talked with you, Ricardo. We talked with the broker. And we said, we still think this was somewhat unethical that they had hidden so much. The broker prides themselves on getting all the bad news out and all the good news out when they put out their offer memo. And so they were very upset by the condition of the property when they saw it too. And so we talked to them and said, hey, look, we think we need to retrade this a little bit, but we didn't want to burn our bridge with the broker. And the broker said, no, we agree. This was egregious. It was way beyond anything that we would expect to see. And so we did some retrading, and actually we were negotiating. Our last day was New Year's Eve. We were negotiating with the sellers up to 6 p.m. on New Year's Eve, last day of due diligence, and finally came to an agreement at the end of the day.
And where did you end up on the rehab budget? Because you had a pretty sizable.
We have a $3 million rehab budget for the property, to fix all the deferred maintenance, and about half of it, maybe a little less than half of it, is for interior unit upgrades, right? So fixing up so that we can have best
and
product,
doing it all
best
up
price.
front. Right?
Correct.
Yeah. Ricardo, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, what was our sales price?
Our ultimate sales price was $15,990.
Okay, and then our rehab was how much?
About $3 million.
And then Ricardo, how did you do that? Were you able to include the rehab into the loan? And tell us a little bit more about what that means, if you can, because you were doing a Fannie Mae loan, right?
Yes.
On that transaction, were you able to include how much into that loan?
We're able to include a good chunk of it. I think we ended up 75% leverage overall of total cost, so purchase price plus rehab. And a lot of that, to Greg's point, was rates came down, so that helped us get even more in the loan. So we were able to push proceeds a little bit to accommodate some of what they found in the due diligence.
So you were able to take the rehab, include it into the main loan itself. Does that happen very often? And what's the determining factor of why it would not happen?
So with value add deals, we are able to roll in rehab on a lot of deals. And the determining factor is the debt service coverage. So you can go up to, in a lot of markets, in Indy, 75% is going to be the max of purchase price plus rehab. Now, can you get there? That's a matter of, it's a debt service calculation. So we still have to be a 125 debt service coverage going in. So to the extent that you can hit the debt service coverage, we can get up to 75% of your purchase price plus rehab.
That's an important thing for people to understand, is that not all transactions you're going to be able to roll in all your rehab, but this transaction on the historical NOI, it had enough income to support up to a 75% leverage transaction with the acquisition price with the rehab included in the deal. So that's very positive, because if we couldn't do it, the buyers would have to bring in the money to do the rehab of the property. And that's been the case on a lot of transactions. So talk with your loan officer up front to kind of figure out what the debt service coverage constraint is. Are you able to go up to the highest leverage in the marketplace? Know that up front, because we don't want any surprises. People don't want any surprises thinking that they can roll everything in to a brand new loan of the rehab and find out at the last moment that you can't.
I think a key decision that you guys made and that we preach a lot is making sure that you're well capitalized up front. You had a larger rehab than you originally anticipated. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to take care of this down the road, I'm going to try to take care of it out of cash flow, you decided, hey, we're either going to raise the loan amount or we're going to raise more money to make sure that you're well capitalized up front. Talk about that decision and how's that played out?
Yeah, I mean, our education is that you go in and you fix everything up front, because then you don't want to fund your rehab out of your NOI. It affects the property. You have to put things, charge things to your NOI, and it affects, affects your deal down the line. And it could affect your exit strategy. So we know that that's not the right way to go. You want to go in day one and have a rehab plan and stick to that. And if the deal doesn't work because of various factors, then sometimes the deal you don't do is the best deal you ever do, right?
For sure.
Sometimes you got to know when to walk away.
Any other challenges during escrow?
Yes.
Funny you ask.
Funny you ask, yeah. So we got all of our paperwork in, our capital raise, and then we were just a couple of days before closing. And
you had rate locked the transaction too.
Yes,
Exactly.
we had done a rate lock, absolutely.
So when the rate lock happens, you typically have X amount of days before you're required to close. A rate lock, just like on a home loan, it's not forever. It's 30, 60, 90 days or whatever, but this rate lock was for, about 30 days from the period of time?
Yeah, I think it was about 45.
45 days?
I think we were expecting to close within 45 days, and we were well within that range. I mean, the contracted close date was well within the 45. We'd even talked about this before we locked. So we locked.
So you locked it?
So we locked, and then we get some news shortly after the rate lock. Greg,
I think I was just going to say the exact dates. I think we locked on about January 15th, somewhere on there. We were supposed to close on Feb 5. We had locked through the end of February. We had some extensions so that we could apply to the purchase and sale agreement. We locked to the end of February just in case we had any troubles raising money. But we were ready to go to close on the specified date, Feb 5. And then
we got a phone call. The sellers had a CNBS loan, and they had a defeasance period that had not expired. And so they were actually locked out of selling the property.
All right, Ricardo, a CMBS lockout. What the heck is Nicole talking about?
Well, a lot of these CMBS loans do have what we call lockout periods, where it's a defeasance prepayment structure, and at some point you can pay it off, but a lot of times you're totally blacked out, or you cannot pay it off. And these guys were under this lockout period, and I don't remember if they just didn't know. I think they didn't know, or they didn't know and they didn't communicate it. But the broker had even said, hey, we thought we'd checked that box. They were almost certain they had checked the box, but there was some disconnect, I guess, between the seller and their lender on what the actual date was.
All right. So a CMBS loan stands for a commercial mortgage-backed security loan. It's a different type of a loan than a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac or even a bank loan. It's securitized. It's similar to like a Fannie Mae loan, but it does, like what you're saying, it has, instead of a yield maintenance prepayment penalty, it has a defeasance prepayment penalty in the transaction, which means that it could be a very large prepayment penalty. So the seller was okay about having them pay that prepayment penalty because you guys were not assuming that loan. You could assume the loan if you wanted to, but it wasn't going to give you the flexibility that you needed that Ricardo and Fannie Mae were able to do. So what happens is that, just like what Ricardo says, maybe the first 2 years there's a lockout, which means that seller cannot refinance, they can't pull cash out, they can't even sell the property that has a loan attached to it for the first 2 years. So I don't think the seller realized that until they started to figure that out at the end, right before you guys were going to close on the deal, that they had this lockout that was in place. Now, that's a problem. So now we have a couple different issues, because when Greg and Nicole and their group wanted to rate lock the deal, and that loan was, how big was that loan? $13 million?
$13.7.
So 13.7, so let's say $14 million or so. You guys had to put up $280,000 just as a rate lock deposit. Mm-hmm. And so you had to take that out of your cash, out of your raise, give it to Fannie Mae as a deposit to guarantee that you were going to show up when the loan was supposed to close on your side. And so if you didn't show up for loan because there was a defeasance penalty that was still in place with this lockout, you would have lost the $275,000. Now that's where it's a zero-sum game. You only have a certain amount of time to close, and if you don't show up, they'll keep your money, and you got to do it all over again. So in this case is that we found out that the seller actually had this lockout only for the next couple month or two. Was it like 35 or 40 days?
March, yeah, their lockout period expired March 14th.
So we had to close on March 14th or 15th, someday around there, right after their expiration of their lockout. But what did that do for you guys? You guys had to extend out the lock. You got a one-time free? Was it a free, Ricardo?
No, unfortunately, it was not free.
And how expensive was it?
It was $51,000 and change.
$51,000. Thank you for playing. So not only did you have $270,000 at risk, you had another $50,000 if we could not close, because you're extending out that rate lock.
And that was a hard cost to the bottom line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The first chunk is a deposit that you get back, the 270 or whatever it was. That you get back.
If you close.
Yeah, if you close. The 50 you didn't get back.
Correct.
That was just, hey,
that's
a fee you're paying for another 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
And the seller said, sorry, but it is what it is.
Yeah, the broker put a lot of pressure on them to cover it, and they ended up, I think it was $10,000. They said, all right, we'll do $10,000, which didn't make us happy, but it was a little bit of a concession.
Yeah. So you guys were able to close. That was a surprise. You did not know it going into the transaction, and something you had to be prepared for. And I would tell you that Greg had a full head of hair before that transaction. He's a little follically challenged now, but I'm sure he had a full head of hair.
Mr. Clean.
That was a tough situation. And we've run into this. You guys aren't the only ones that have gone through this. And unfortunately, there's check boxes and check the boxes you can do up front. And the selling broker, a lot of times that's on the top of their list to know what's going on with the seller's loan, but they just didn't know. They just didn't know until they'd reached out.
So what we've learned out of this deal, again, is make sure right before you guys go into a contract, ask one more time to the seller, does the seller have the ability to give free title to the property at this specific date? And so that would just be something to consider. All right, so you guys close. Everyone's happy. Everything's going great. Let's kind of move the story down a little bit farther because I always like to hear stories. So then what happens? You guys close in March?
Yeah, March 15th.
Okay. And you're starting to do your rehab of the property.
Yeah, we were there for takeover with our management company.
Okay.
And they were just kind of hanging around, waiting for the phone call to say, we're all good, we're closed, go. Got the phone call, and immediately our management company went out and grabbed a huge box out of the back of their vehicle, and it had parking passes and notifications for all the residents and a new flag for the flagpole. And it was a well orchestrated event. And so that was a very cool day. It was a very fun day. And we were there for the next few days. We had done a lot of work already preparing for some of the rehab items. How Greg and I choose to run our business is we oversee all rehab. I don't give anybody that $3 million of rehab money. That's my money.
Right.
The management company, I expect them to run the day-to-day and take care of work orders and things like that. But we negotiate all of the contracts for rehab. And so we spent copious amounts of time, making contacts in the local area with vendors, meeting with them on property, walking them around, telling them what we wanted, and learning ourselves. Because sometimes what you think you want is maybe not what you want at the end of the day. And they say, "Ooh, are you sure?" So it's an education on both sides. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And we've got some amazing vendors that we work with. Overall, we've been immensely pleased.
So everything was going great up until June, what?
15.
Father's Day weekend.
Yeah.
Father's Day
That's
weekend.
burned in my head.
So tell us a little bit about what happened on Father's Day weekend.
So Nicole's actually from Canada, across the river from Detroit. And we were over in Canada having dinner with her family. And we got a phone call from our regional manager, which is strange time, Saturday at 8 o'clock for a regional manager to call you. So I ran out of the restaurant and she said, "Hey, we heard there's been a tornado in Beech Grove, which is where our property is. And we hear there's some damage to the property. The maintenance guys are headed over there. I just want to let you know. Don't really know much other than that." So we were just about done with dinner. We headed home. We looked on the news, surfed the internet, couldn't find anything, but had heard that there was some damage in the area. So we decided to get in the car and head down. And we were about halfway down to Indianapolis. It was about midnight. And Nicole's sister, who works nights, was surfing the internet and found some news stories that had been posted about our property and texted them to us. So as we're driving down, we're watching this video of, here we're standing in front of Beach Meadow Apartments and tornado did damage to the buildings and these residents don't have a place to live tonight. And that was a fun moment, as you can imagine. We were like, oh my gosh. We got down to Indianapolis about 2 a.m. There was nothing going on at that point because nobody was going to get up on a roof in the dark with holes in the roof. So by 7 a.m, we were on the property, and it just so happens one of our best contractors, their offices are a mile from the property. So they had guys there already putting tarps on the roof, and we got that sealed off. But that was a pretty interesting weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we were making phone calls to our vendors on the way down. We had already been lining up, folks to get out there immediately.
So how many units were affected by the tornado? How big was the tornado?
So it was a EF1, right, which is the lowest of a tornado, but it still has 100 mile an hour plus winds. So nothing to sneeze at for sure. And there were 3 buildings that were impacted by the tornado, total of 24 units in those 3 buildings. Not all of them were damaged beyond, a little bit of repair, but we have 9 units that are down now, no power to them. What happened was the roof actually lifted up and then slammed right back down. So there was, of course, some major concern initially about building integrity and structural damage. So the fire marshal actually vacated all of those buildings completely that first night until we could get a sense of to maintain the safety of the residents. Luckily, the community center for the city is right across the street, and so that's where the Red Cross set up. And so it was right across the street from the apartment complex that people could go sleep on the cots if they needed to, if they didn't have family in the area, food, blankets, that kind of stuff, and city service assistance, Red Cross assistance for that.
So that was for every unit. All the 24 units
All 24
were displaced
in
day
that
one.
the night of the storm. Yes.
Okay. For how long?
2 days. I think they were allowed back in Monday morning. We were able to they actually turned the power off to those 3 buildings, at the transformer, but they were able to turn power back on Monday morning.
So what's the order of events that happens to you that you would want people to understand is that the tornado happens, you just happen to be down there, you're the contractors on the property. Do you let your lender know? Do you let your insurance company know? And you still have a mortgage payment that you continue to make payments on, but you don't have 9 units or so that are paying rent.
Right. So yes, you have to let your team know. They're part of your team. You let your team know immediately. So lender knew, insurance broker knew right away. And we have loss of rents coverage for our insurance. So ultimately we will be reimbursed.
But you're not getting that right now.
We do not have that right now.
So right now that loan is in interest only, so you're not paying towards your principal, thank God.
Yes.
And so during the period of time that they're doing a rehab, and do they have an idea how long it's going to take to do the rehab to the property to bring it back up to codes for 2019?
Yeah. So when we first started, we met with the insurance adjuster. He came out and walked the property. We were there with him. But because of the way the storm came through and the way the electrical is run through the trusses in the roof, they felt they needed an engineering consulting firm and somebody who has the engineering skills to ensure that the structure of the roofs especially were going to be okay. So that delayed things a little bit because now they had to get somebody else to come in there and walk. And that person had to come 3 separate times to get everything, all the information they needed. We were told that all the write-up and all the information gathering should have been done by the end of last week.
So when are they expecting to have it complete and then tenants back in those units? By the end of the year?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
It usually takes 6 to 9 months to have from the period of time that there's a fire or a flood. Everything's been settled with the insurance company, but sometimes it could take up to a year to get some of this stuff done. But your insurance that you have may cover the damage, but it's not going to cover your rents until the very end. And then you have to kind of fight with your insurance company about how many units you had that were vacant at the time, and do you use those numbers? So if the property was 100% occupied, and now you're adding 9 new units to it, there's a certain formula that they use to kind of figure that out. So don't think during the period of time that the tenants are there, you're going to get paid for loss of rents. It's not until the very end, and then they'll argue with you exactly how much money that they owe you on that one. So the rest of the property, let's move away from the 9 units. The rest of the property, how's that doing?
So there was some damage to other buildings, but it was mostly soffit damage. Nothing structurally questionable. So we're lucky in that respect that it's a big property. We can deal with having the 9 down units and make it through the other side, even if we don't get that loss of rents until after.
The property is occupied fairly highly?
Yes, it's above 90.
Above 90
yes.
for the rest of the...
I think it's at 94.
Fantastic. So your plan right now is really to fix the down units, get those back online, and then just continue to operate the property, keep it as a stabilized asset.
Absolutely.
And then do real well. Anything else that you learned during this acquisition and rehab and tornado? Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, one of the great things about as an apartment owner, you always have to think about the silver lining, right? Because there are things that are going to happen that you don't expect, or that may be I'll call it a learning opportunity. And this tornado certainly has been that for us. But one thing we know that'll be great is when these units do get rebuilt, they're not going to be put back the way they were. They're going to be brand new. We were going to be rebuilding a lot of these units anyway, maybe not quite, not to the studs, but,
Sure.
So we're going to get 9 brand new, completely beautiful units that will be covered by insurance. Now, we're going to have to wait a little bit for all the money for that, but at the end of the day, we're going to have a positive out of it.
Absolutely. The remaining piece of the rehab, where are you through the process? I know you had a ton of AC work. You had a lot of other exterior work that was going on. How's that going?
It's
Any
going
updates
well.
there?
Yeah, we've tried very hard not to let the other distractions slow us down from making progress. So we have continued with our rehab plans as scheduled. We've had 3 different vendors over the last couple of weeks crawling through the property, replacing windows, because many of the windows in the complex were original single pane, aluminum. Anything that is getting replaced with double pane vinyl. We've had an HVAC contractor going through and inspecting all of the HVAC systems. If they're original, immediately put on the list for replacement. If they're newer, are they serviceable? Clean them, make sure they're in good running order. We're trying to get ahead of winter to make sure that our residents will not be interrupted by a poor furnace. And the other thing we've been doing...
Well, we did get a Fannie Green loan, which I think was 7 to 10 basis points benefit. So part of that, we did exterior LED lighting. We're going to go through and do all the LED lighting, which was also one of the requirements. As the HVAC contractor's going through, we're putting in smart thermostats. We also, I mentioned the old water tanks. We replaced anything that was older than, I think, 10 years old, we replaced. And it was funny because afterwards we had a lot of tenants say, "Oh man, thank you." The water used to go hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Now it's just hot. So I think the tenants are starting to notice that there's some change going on at the property.
We did some roof replacements also. That was probably the first thing we did.
Yes, it was.
Other than the tree trimming.
Just before the tornado.
Luckily, none of the new roofs were on the 3 buildings that were damaged. So we'll get new roofs on those.
Greg definitely likes this multifamily business, but Nicole definitely has the passion for the multifamily business. Tell us a little bit about what has changed in your life in the last, say, 6 months, about what you were doing before and now what are you doing today?
Yeah, so I worked for Ford Motor Company for almost 20 years, and I was actually able to retire earlier this year. And I'm way busier than I ever thought I would be. But it's incredible to be able to decide what you think is important to work on. So although I'm working very hard, some days it doesn't feel like it. And I get to decide when I do that work. I'm also now giving back. We've mentioned Lifestyles Unlimited a few times. And we've been members of that organization for a number of years now and have benefited from their learnings and their guidance and their mentorship. And now I'm giving back. And I am actually a mentor for Lifestyles Unlimited now.
That's great. So you're able to show the people all the things that you've learned and have them kind of, in their mind, work through you to kind of shortcut the system. Because, you can do it yourself or you can have somebody guide you to get through this forest with a mentor, with an educator, with what Lifestyles does. And now you're giving back and you're becoming an educator, mentor to help some of these people who've never done it before. So I give you a lot of credit for that. At some period of time, maybe Greg will actually join you in that venture.
I know he would love that.
Absolutely.
So you're out in different areas of the country. So if you have a chance to meet Greg and Nicole Scott, if somebody wanted to get to know you a little bit better, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of us is on through our email address. You can reach out. It's drivehomecapital@gmail.com. So just the 3 words mushed together, drivehomecapital@gmail.
That's great. Ricardo, final thoughts or words?
Pleasure to have you guys. Great friends. You guys have been with us before. I'm sure we'll have you on again as you continue to grow your business, scale up the business. We appreciate the time.
Thank
you for having us.
All right, Nicole and Greg Scott, thanks for coming and spending some time with us here at the Old Capital Podcast. We appreciate that. Continued success. We look forward to talking to you next time after your next 250 to 300 unit building. So we appreciate that. Again, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.